everybody's starting to file in, I don't want us to lose too much time. So I'm going to kick off with a quick introduction to the Institute and to this webinar series. This is our very first. So do please be gentle with us as we figure things out and we make sure that it all works and all those fun things. But of course, making it about design and iteratively learning, we're going to practice a little of what we've preached today. But to kick off, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. And I'm really happy to have Magnetic as our first webinar co-hosts because design is such an important part of innovation management, and there's a lot of conversation that's going on right now around this topic, and the Institute itself has kind of come about in answer to the need to help to professionalize innovation management. And what that really means is, how do we know what good looks like? How do we know what are the right types of skills, what are the right competencies that anyone who's managing innovation in an organization should know and should be able to demonstrate? And this is a really important question when we're in the process of trying to improve across the board how innovation is done. And what this really answers is giving organizations more confidence in making decisions when it comes to innovating, when it comes to putting the rubber to the road, so to speak, and actually changing tooling, investing in a new process, adding in a new software or new technology, and committing to that change. And so we're in the process of determining what it is that an innovation manager should know. And part of that is very much around how much should they know about design. And design thinking has had its moment in the sun, and it's been a very popular practice, but perhaps it's kind of, when it's not combined with expert skill and competency, sometimes perhaps loses a bit of its magic or understanding. And perhaps it's also affected how people see design overall in an overarching sense. So it's quite important that we start to understand and have that conversation about, where does design sit within innovation management? Is it something worthwhile? And how much should someone know? So if you're responsible for innovation management, should you be able to understand that it might not just be about the graphics and the look of your website at the end of the day, but in fact, there's a lot more that design can bring to the innovation management process. And in fact, the only way that you come up with innovation is that you design innovation. There's no other way to achieve it in a way. So what is it that they should understand, and what is it that design actually brings? And so having Magnetic join us to tell you about this is absolutely fabulous, because they've been very much involved in supporting Innovate UK and their innovation growth specialists. They've helped to train up those individuals around what is design and how to apply it. And so I'm going to hand over now to Toby, who's going to tell you a little bit about what they do. And we're so lucky to have Mickey join us as well, to be able to go into some examples for us and to really demonstrate what does it mean when we in fact apply design in innovation management. So Toby, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Victoria. That was an amazing tee up, and I just want to say also a massive, well done and congratulations for you on establishing the Institute of Innovation Management. Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute privilege to be co-hosting this first IIM webinar. We actually joked, I think Victoria mentioned this already. If it does go wrong, apologies, but we'll learn from it. We'll iterate, and someone else will then deliver an even better one next time round. I think Victoria will talk about next in the series at the end. But Yes, I'm Toby DeBold. I'm an innovation director here at the innovation consultancy Magnetic. It's also, yeah, a privilege for us being a founding member of the Institute of Innovation Management. As Victoria mentioned, we're going to focus this session on the role of design within innovation management. So it's very clear, and we're going to talk obviously about the role that it plays. So as a general sort of running order, I'll give some context. Then we're going to have a little chat with a pro. We're going to bring in Mickey, and we'll finally open up to questions. Please also we'll be a little section which will be a bit interactive. There'll be a time to use the chat function, which we'll have open. And I think we've got a Q&A function that's running throughout. We'll try and keep an eye, but we've got a dedicated Q&A section at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to make sure I share my screen. I think that's all coming through. So I'm just going to talk with our sort of first exam question is, how does design sort of drive measurable business impact? And it's a recognition or concern that a lot of people does have. I'm just going to talk through a few areas. So firstly, it shapes perception. It accelerates business outcomes. And thirdly, it multiplies value. Right? These all sound pretty bold statements, yet it's also backed up with all sorts of statistical evidence. So this is me getting out my sort of big bold numbers right from the outset. I mentioned that it shapes perception. Stanford have got a research paper that recognizes 3/4 of people judge a company's credibility based on its design. We talked about it accelerating business outcomes. McKinsey, in their seminal paper, The Business Value of Design, identified design-led companies grew by 2 to 3 times faster than industry benchmarks. And I mentioned about multiplying value, and this is attributed to our very own design council that 20 times more revenue is generated for every pound spent on design. So these are really nice, compelling stats. So if there's value in design, what do we mean by design? Again, Victoria sort of mentioned a couple of these elements, and it can mean a lot of things. And rather than a single definition, I quite like to use an example that a lot of us can relate to. And I also know there are some people in the audience who I'm sure are also quite familiar with this analogy that I use quite frequently. I use it when we help to support Innovate UK's Design for Growth service. Again, I think some of you are familiar with that. So you will be familiar, I'm sure, but please still contribute within this. So Victoria, this will be a bit of the cue for bringing up the chat function. For me, imagine 2 coffee shops that sit right next to each other that sell exactly the same coffee for exactly the same price. So same location, same product, same price. What makes you go into caffeine there on the left rather than common ground on the right, or common ground over caffeine? If you put your answers into the chat, I'll just see what sort of things come through. Well, what's kind of like gravitating through to you? I say caffeine on the left, common ground on the right. What makes you go into one rather than the other? Starting to see a few things coming through in the chat about a good coffee.
Dog is the
Interesting.
answer.
Who doesn't like a dog? Customer service, environment, ambiance, like it. Excellent comment. There's a great quote from a gentleman called Mark Fontaine. Some of you may be familiar with Mark's work. Is when you have two coffee shops right next to each other that sell the exact same coffee at the exact same price, service design is what makes you walk into one rather than the other. Come back more often and tell your friends about it. It's attributed to Mark Fontaine, if you wanted to quote him. Great extra comments I've just seen coming through. So thank you. All of those things that you mentioned there within the chat would definitely influence what would make someone go into one rather than the other. And here are some of the reasons we came up with. And the point here really is that design does play a central role in achieving all of these things and many more. Design helps you achieve all those things that sit around the product, the location, and the price. And crucially, the one that you walk into has put the customer at the heart of the experience. Everything is designed around them to maximize and optimize their experience. And just thinking about one aspect we've mentioned, getting that right, is probably not enough. It needs to be thought of holistically. So we design customer interactions that all relate to one another on an emotional level, and therefore give something to people that they want to come back for more. So I'm going to stick with the coffee shop example just a little bit further, and we're going to dive into it and just recognize how design helps in really obvious ways. It helps in things that you use, like the cups and the saucers, things that are nice to look at. Are they good quality? Are they nice to hold? The interiors, I think some people talked about the interior. What's the vibe like? The furniture you sit on, the lighting, the ambiance, stuff on the walls. A logo. I think, again, somebody mentioned there about putting effort into the logo. It's a simple way to differentiate yourself from your competitors, makes you stand out. A website, a way to help people find you, or sell some other things you have, like ground coffee and bags. And that kind of things all needs to be packaged. So design can influence your packaging too. Design can also help in less obvious ways. So it can help design a better queuing system that helps the experience better for your customers. It can be wider than branding, not just the logo, but thinking how you expand this and make your brand shout out a little bit louder. It can be a payment system, so designing a more practical approach to making things easier for the customer and the staff. Excuse me, it might also be an employee app that helps your staff work more efficiently, or maybe even new product lines. How can you increase your customer by expanding your offer? And then there are also ways that are totally invisible to customers. So these are things we talk about before the customers see or interact to some degree with your product or service or your coffee. So there are lots of things behind the scenes that design can help with too. We're talking about things like an onboarding journey to help new staff understand how we do things in a coffee shop. This is how we take orders. This is how we greet customers. A different finance workflow. How could that be more efficient and more easy? It could be designing an employee training program to elevate your baristas to be the best on the street or be the best in the city. And it can be aligning all of these touch points that we have, making sure the experience is always the same and understand which ones our customers love and how we can elevate the ones that maybe don't love us so much. And then the final one on here is we can think about our CRM systems and making sure we really understand our customers. So the main point I'm trying to make here is that design is so much wider than many people and businesses think. Yes, it's not just, there are the physical things. It is visuals and styling, absolutely, but so much more than that. And I think design has a power to drive positive change. It has the ability to help us reframe really big challenges to deliver more for all. It's all about getting past a bit of the status quo and away from people saying, but that's always how things have been done. And that's certainly why Magnetic, our business, we talk about designing better futures. So when we talk about design, we're talking about something that's human-centered, inclusive, sustainable, and therefore better than how it was before. So I'm just going to round this little section off. This is a little bit of my little context. Is design is problem solving. It's optimistic and positive and looks to make things better. Very importantly, it's also people-centered. It's not just about problem, but solving the right problem, a problem that people really, really care about. It's about creating, about making things and getting from strategy and ideas to actually making things. It's also iterative, perhaps like these webinars. So we want to make discoveries early before we invest too much money or too much time in something that isn't quite right. So hopefully you can recognize these, and design being a really core ingredient to innovation management. And I think this is something that we're going to be really advocate for. It's really explicit within any innovation standards that are being created. So with all this grounding, let's bring in a real designer voice, and let's have the opportunity to talk to Mickey. So I'm going to stop sharing and say good morning to you, Mickey.
Toby.
Let's hear a little bit of background. I hope you haven't done a disservice to you and your profession, but give us a little bit of background to you and why design?
Yeah, of course. Nice to see everyone here. I'm Mickey. A little bit of background, why design? Well, I've always enjoyed art and creating growing up. To be honest, I was quite a kid growing up, and my parents thought, oh, we'll put her in art classes, it'll help her express herself. But for myself, I always felt that art was, as I grew up, I felt art was a little too internally focused for my own liking. There was like a practical bit in my brain kind of itching to apply the creativity to something to solve some problems, like you mentioned around design earlier, Toby. So where I probably got into it was studying design at university at Goldsmiths. It was a course literally just called design. It was not necessarily like graphic design or web design or product design, just design. Very investigative course, and very much focused on understanding the kind of chosen area you were investigating, doing that design research, understanding the problem behind things and people's perspectives on things, and then kind of figuring out how to execute that afterwards, how to do the design side of things afterwards. So yeah, I got to do a little bit of lots there, got a real taste for variety there, I think. But to be honest, at the time, I don't think I really realized what the course was trying to do or understood how it applied to, again, the next layer of practical of how does this actually apply to a business context until actually moving into innovation design. So yeah, I suppose that's how I grew into innovation design.
So innovation design. So that was going to be what I'm going to go into next is how did you then stumble across magnetic and the world of innovation?
At a portfolio event, actually, I had no idea innovation was even an industry, didn't know innovation design was a thing. But someone at this event looked at my portfolio. He, bless him, very honestly said that he thought I would be bored working there at his ad agency, and told me to look into innovation design, said I had real variety in my portfolio and like clearly liked that problem solving element of it. And so yeah, looking into innovation design, that's how I then found Magnetic as like, innovation agency. Um, and I've since grown my career in designing within innovation, with now over 6 years at Magnetic. I still feel like a baby compared to people like yourself, Toby, with decades of experience in innovation, but through and through a kind of, I think, new breed of designer working within innovation. And I've gotten to work with a whole variety of industries, companies, project teams, which has been so interesting and so fun, like from hospitals in Dorset to M&M's chocolate stores to children and families in Abu Dhabi, just real variety. And I've found it so interesting every time. And at Magnetic, I've gone from doing the user researching and creating and executing to more recently as well, leaning more into leading our designers and our craft and the quality of our craft, the way we do design within innovation.
Oh, I love that. You mentioned variety there a few times. You mentioned variety in your course at Goldsmiths, and also at Magnetic. What is it about variety that appeals for you?
Good question. It's just interesting. I think you get to do lots of different types of design craft, which I quite like. I enjoy being a bit of a jack of all trades, learning lots of different types of things and applying it to lots of different things. And you get to, I suppose, apply that same experience in lots of different scenarios, problem solving in lots of different ways. You can always push to approach things in the best way possible for different challenges, not necessarily settle or get too used to doing things just one way, because every problem is unique and has a different way you can approach it. And even within the kind of end-to-end design process, I feel like you're problem solving in loads of different ways, starting from the broad thing of who are we designing for and why, those people kind of problems. What are their actual problems? What are we designing to solve those problems? All the way down to the detail of then how do we design and execute that? So you're kind of working through that funnel of from big problems to small. So you're solving the right problems for finding the right problems to solve and then finding the right way to solve it. Those different lenses, approaches, different fidelities of design.
Mm, I love it. I love it. And you sort of alluded almost maybe as you're going down that funnel potentially, but you talked about different design crafts. Can you bring to life or just give an overview of what those different design crafts are and how they're used within innovation projects?
Yeah, of course. We use loads at Magnetic. Everything from graphic design, UI, UX design, product design and prototyping, service design, as and illustration, motion design. Um, Special mention to AI in design as well as like a new tool. It's not necessarily a or debatable, I suppose, but not necessarily yet like a type of design in the same way the others are, but it's definitely a really interesting and useful tool that's pushing our practice in different ways. And I will talk about this a little more later as well. But for me, I think within innovation design, I think design really helps to translate those conceptual ideas and strategies into something really tangible, because I think it's all kind of in theory until you actually do it. You can talk about it loads. Different people will have maybe slightly different ideas of what something is, but design helps you to actually do it and make it real. And these make things like tangible, and we're real people, we're physical humans in the world. Tangible outputs do have an impact on us, whether it's something we see or feel or experience or touch or taste. But these tangible outputs, when designed well, should leave a lasting human impact. And when we target the right human problems to impact as well, we can create business impact, because businesses are made of people or are for people. So yeah, that's I think why we've got such a people focus and fixation. Um, yeah, one more thing as well is where I've I've seen design work best is when design's been involved from the beginning of a process, because as I've mentioned a couple times as well, I think identifying and understanding the right human problems is really crucial. Um, and having designers as part of that is really important, because this understanding is what then becomes the DNA of any design output as well. It's hard to design something well when you don't understand the problem, because I think anything you design needs to be in response to a problem. And for us, that's usually human problems. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And we've been chatting away. We've been kind of like having a few little conversations, but we've also, I think what will be really interesting is now making it a bit more tangible, a bit more visible to all of us here. And so what I'd love us to now do is, bring to life and bring, some of those design examples from your experience. So yeah, if we could just sort of delve into some of those and bring out any own personal highlights you've got within these.
course. I very handily have some examples ready. I would love to share in a little more detail three kind of projects where there's maybe like less obvious examples of design as we might usually think of it. If we think back to that coffee shop example you talked through, Toby. But yeah, three projects in a little more detail, and also a few other projects that I want to just flick through and share and show the kind of variety of the things we do. But this first project I wanted to share was a piece of work we did with Dorset NHS. They were undergoing some systemic changes that would really impact the whole county's health system. And they wanted to make sure that any changes would, of course, have a positive effect on residents of Dorset. And the way to do this is by first understanding what the experience is like for patients and staff today, starting with their perspectives and their problems. So what we did with designers, myself, involved from the very beginning was shadow some reablement officers across Dorset. So what this looked like was following them on their day-to-day job, being in the car with them, driving to visit elderly residents' homes, going back to the office with them. This is, to be honest, probably one of my favorite bits of user research I've ever done. You learn so much about what the job is like, what the experience of reablement is like, just by being there with people. Speaking to residents directly, asking questions, being in their homes, because I think you learn so much from someone just by stepping in their space. I don't know if you've ever been to a friend's home for the first time, but sometimes you go in and you're like, this makes a lot of sense. And it feels kind of similar when you're going in and speaking to people like this. But we did all this user research with an open mind to understanding what problems that residents and staff were actually experiencing, and of going in prepared, but with as few preconceptions as possible. And that led us to surface some really real human stories and crucial problems that people are facing, not just the problems that we thought people were facing in the system. And then the challenge off the back of that was, well, we've got all these great stories, but they couldn't live in isolation. We didn't want to just like keep those for ourselves, but how could we share those stories more widely in a way that sticks with people and like creates action, but also, you know, protects the anonymity of residents? We couldn't be going and like sharing photos of everyone and these really personal stories of people. As you might have guessed from the image on the screen, we did this through a series of illustrations and storyboards depicting the story of a reablement officer and physiotherapist supporting a resident who had been severely let down by the system. And it was a story of real experiences with real quotes and like, even though these are illustrations, the things they depict are really real, and you are able to kind of like emotionally connect with it so much as seeing it. And in telling the story and like crafting the story through both the words and visuals, we could share it a lot more widely amongst the teams working on this. And, you know, really emotionally connect with people while highlighting what opportunities lay ahead as well in improving this experience and designing this to be a better experience for people. And so, yeah, the impact of all of this was the story of this particular person ended up being a really powerful anecdote that we could share, and became a key example that we were using with different people, all of whom, like, as soon as they saw this, kind of immediately understood how awful the situation was, and were able to use it as a push to have bridging services become a lot more recovery focused rather than maintenance. And off the back of sharing this story, the team got COO agreement as well around this shifted focus for bridging services, which was huge and like a really meaningful step in the right direction for this program. And these insights were then taken forwards into redesigning the actual reablement apps as well that staff are using. So that's a bit of, you know, product UI UX design there as well. That having this really shows how interwoven like design and innovation were through this process, and how they feed into each other seamlessly, but are able to create something so powerful together. And, using that design thinking to help us research and design itself as a catalyst for change as well. I think, I was very proud of this bit of work, and hope, maybe you've been reading bits or just looking through the illustrations, but I think it can really hit different seeing some of this and hearing some of this.
Really powerful, really powerful.
The second project that I want to talk about, bit of a change in tone, was one we did with Google Cloud. Google Cloud was looking to partner with a pharmaceutical company called Roche. They'd already done several projects together and were looking to secure a longer term partnership. But the problem was, well, they needed to convince Roche they were the perfect partners, live happily ever after, leave them excited about the future partnership. And we'd already worked with Google Cloud on various other projects, including some product design, UI, UX bits for their internal teams. But our approach for this one was to actually animate the story of the future partnership between Google Cloud and Roche, showing what could be achieved together and the impact that could have. So we went through this process. These are some fun little behind the scenes photos, but we went through the process of basically trying to translate a strategy into a story, and one that could be visualized and turned into motion. Turn it into something that was not just the strategy we were talking about, but was something that you could see and get and kind of leave people in the boardroom feeling energized as well. And so if we go from top left, these are some behind the scene pictures of, turning that strategy into a script that we then sketched out into storyboard on Post-its, literally just drawing little stick figures almost onto Post-its that you can kind of quickly change and iterate on as you were building out the story, turning that into a lo-fi in the top right, lo-fi storyboard for feedback on the overall idea to get that kind of early buy-in and get feedback on the broad strokes first and not fixating too much on the detail. To in the bottom left, turning that into a high fidelity storyboard, again for a different level of feedback, this time feedback on the details, and get that ready to take into animation. And the bottom right is just a fun little makeshift setup for the temporary voiceover audio, so we could use that for pacing the animation whilst the actual voiceover is being commissioned. But the outcome of this was a roughly 2-minute video showing the vision for the partnership, how the two companies could work together, the impact this could have, and the outcome of this, the result of this was we heard that it had been used by, well, apart from the clients being really happy about this, we'd heard it had been used by some quite senior people at Google Cloud as well to get a $39 million deal committed when it was maybe looking a little tenuous. But yeah, was one hell of a result, and it was so cool to see that it's a lot of extra effort to go and create a beautiful design asset like this, but it really tells a very powerful story, and that power and shows the power of turning that strategy into something really tangible and visual. It makes things feel a lot more real. It leaves a lasting emotional impact, even on people at those highest board levels. And it can really influence some of that decision making as well. And this is all decision making behind the scenes too, not necessarily always just the final product. The last example I wanted to touch on, this is not a project I worked on super closely outside of a bit of support here and there, but it's a really nice example of service design, which Toby talked about a little bit about earlier, and I really want to highlight this. It's a project with Essex County Council to enhance their adult social care service delivery, which was struggling with rising demand, capacity challenges, and centering the service around the resident experience. Similar to the Dorset project, we started with understanding the experience of people within the system, doing interviews with residents, frontline staff, expert stakeholders, But this time, instead of just illustrating it, what we really needed was a way to map out really clearly what the current state of the service is, so that we could identify the biggest problems and biggest opportunities. And then we could look at how to address these and explore these. And so that's where service design came in. Again, we had designers involved throughout the whole process, but we use service design, like design thinking, to synthesize all the insights we gained from the interviews and map that out into a really clear journey map of the experience for both residents and staff. So, for example, at the top here, you can see some squiggly lines. Those represented the emotional journey that residents in red and staff in blue would go through at different stages of the process. And at a glance, even you can kind of quite clearly see where the dips are. And those are maybe signs of where some of the biggest issues are at the moment. And perhaps those are places we should focus our attention to going forwards. And in some of the rows below, it goes through the different actions that residents and staff take through their journeys, the kind of goals and expectations residents have for each of these stages, the pain points, the impact that these things are currently having on the adult social care service, and the current strengths of the service as well. It looks like a lot. It is a really nuanced overview of the different themes heard from residents and staff, but it really does an incredible job of bringing a really complicated system of problems and enablers into a single view that people can go through and understand and agree upon and act on. It takes it from that invisible system that maybe feels way too complex to ever articulate, and turns it into something tangible and also actionable. And off the back of this, we created a future state version of this as well, and also actually focused on some key pain points to illustrate as well, coming back to this and bring to life with storyboard visuals too. So again, that same thing of that's a wider system, but actually there's some moments we wanted to really zoom in on and speak to more emotionally and share in more detail. But yeah, this was another project where we had designers throughout the project, both to help interrogate the problem, but also turn it into something tangible and understandable at the end.
I think these are really good examples, Mickey, of showing exactly that, design isn't like the end outcome or the visuals type thing, but there's a lot of storytelling, a lot of support in, understanding the context, understanding the system, understanding, and then helping to support, stakeholder buy-in and building that. So those are I really love you sort of going through some of them, because they might not be as well recognized maybe as other areas of design. So I think hopefully you've got a few other things sort of in your stack, in your portfolio, other design highlights, but you also did allude a little bit earlier to that term AI. I would love to know about how that's sort of starting to influence or impact the design profession. So if you can cover that in some of your other little highlights, that would be great to hear.
Absolutely. I do have a couple of highlights that use AI in design, but I think just on that, it's really interesting because I think it's created a new bucket of craft skills to learn in a very short amount of time. I think with other things like, UI, UX in this broad scale of design is also fairly new in terms of a bucket of design, but that's evolved over decades, and this is happening all within the span of a few years. And so we're all having to adapt and learn very speedily, whether in design or not in design, but it's adapting and learning. This is stuff we do across a lot of our projects as well anyways, but it's really allowing us to get a lot further and push our thinking and making a lot further than we might have done in the same amount of time. So, for example, we can visualize maybe more concepts than we could have previously, maybe show a spread of, instead of 3 concepts, show a spread of 10, like really quick, like lo-fi concepts, or get into prototyping far more quickly, which I do have an example on that in a sec. But another thing I think we're really thinking about is what things do we want to automate versus where it's maybe like 90% AI and 10% human. What things do we want to augment? So it's maybe a bit more of a partnership of 50-50. And what things do we want to keep human, where it's like 90% human with maybe just touch of AI support or none at all. But I think it's these days in business, it's rare that you get no AI influence at all. But little peek at more work. I'm just going to whiz through these, kind of give a bit of a one-liner of each of these, but I think it gives a really nice example of the variety of things we do with design at Magnetic. I mentioned M&Ms earlier. This was a really cool project around designing and testing new M&Ms offerings, as well as supporting their kind of global franchising. So things like inviting real customers at M&M stores in New York to preview new products and observing which one they would pick if given the choice, and then interviewing them afterwards as well about this. But lots of design involved throughout, from creating the concepts to testing those concepts. A project with Early Childhood Authority in Abu Dhabi. So this was all around supporting 8-year-olds and unders, 8 and under children and their families in Abu Dhabi, where we were experimenting with some new initiatives to help families in Abu Dhabi spend less time on screens. So things like in these 2 photos, a time well spent and like tech swap initiative, where we'd worked with local cafes and soft play areas to basically swap people's phones for physical games that people could play with their kids. Worked really, really well. People loved it. And we also ended up turning those findings into a whole immersive exhibition, which was another crazy thing. But there's a lot of design clearly involved there too, and design in prepping things for the experiments and creating like quick fake little lean brands that were like just enough for us to test ideas. I mentioned other Google Cloud projects. We'd worked with them to prototype a new internal sales platform as well for their B2B team. This is like a little example of one of the UIs, but it was a fully clickable digital prototype that we created. AI. This is an AI one. I can't reveal which brand this was with, but we recently used AI to quickly prototype a new platform that product managers could use to take ideas into development quicker. And it was pretty mind-blowing to be using AI in this, because to create a prototype of this kind of fidelity, where it's clickable, it's quite usable, it's got animation in it as well, might have taken us like 2 weeks or something previously. But it took us 3 designers about 3 days to create this level of prototype with the help of things like Figma Make, and just getting those ideas to of high fidelity of reality a lot quicker. Although there's still questions around when is the right time to do this, I think. I think we have also sometimes ended up going too keen, and it was like, okay, we'll make this prototype in AI and it becomes a really high fidelity thing. But then you start getting feedback on the wrong elements. You get feedback on the details and rather than the broad strokes. And we're like, actually, was this even the right idea? Did we overinvest in that idea? So there's still a lot of the same design thinking and design questions and principles we still need to apply. So yeah, really useful tool, but still needs to be used in the right moments and right places. Another AI example is this campaign video we created with the help of AI filmmaking tools. This lady does not exist, not real, but we used Google Flow and Midjourney to kind of create these animations, and it was like us humans art directing and putting together the final things, but using AI to help us create a lot of the content as well. But asylum shop alongs with customers and stores across the UK. Again, designers involved throughout this to understand the experiences of shopping in store, in physical stores, and then designing experiments after. M&S, rethinking the kind of gifting experience through really subtle UX choices and clever copywriting. And this was quite an interesting one because we weren't trying to reinvent the design system, but just within the current system, look at how we could quite cleverly use copy to give people the feeling that they are really considerate of others. Yeah, so lots of like subtle changes. And yeah, last example is a set of tools we've developed to help us measure the impact of our own work to yeah, designed, created with designers involved. So yeah, that's where we are getting close to time for questions.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, measuring the impact of design, I mean, have you kind of thought then about how you figure that out?
Yes, it's not straightforward. These are like lovely little cards that we have used to create like use as tools to help us with that. But it's definitely no single silver bullet way to do this. I think we'd all be doing that if there was. But handily, on the next page, there is a spectrum of impact we can be measuring, everything from emotional and behavioral to more numerical. And this is one of the ways that we're thinking about how we are making impact, but also measuring the impact. And so this is like a little cheat sheet that we have and use that kind of gives us some examples of different buckets of impact we would want to measure, and then the specific ways and metrics we might be able to use as some examples, as some food for thought for how we would actually want to measure those. And yeah, I think there's also a general behavioral thinking thing too of moving from thinking about not just what outputs are we making. So we're not just making like an illustration or animation, but what's the outcome we want from that of we want to shift some emotion or we want to create this kind of impact out of that outcome and with design. Yeah.
Cool, cool, cool. Well, Mickey, thank you so much. You just all brought to life all sorts of different, yeah, that element of breadth of design has sort of like shone through on that. And then just wrapping up there, just a little bit about, talking about design driving measurable business impact within innovation management. So again, you sort of shared all sorts of stories of design-led success and demonstrate how design is not just about creative flair, but it's also really strategic. We talk about storytelling and decision making, influencing, and some of those elements that are really super critical within sort of modern innovation management. So big thank you, Becky, for offering designers sort of input and insights into your career. Talked obviously a wide range of projects, of stories, and tangible value of design. So thanks for that. We have got some time for some questions. So I'll just give a little pause if people have got some questions. Please use the Q&A function within there. And I might just, as people start to sort of like, I don't know, take on board everything that you've been talking about and sort of add in some questions. I've actually got a couple of questions for you, Mickey, and I'm going to go back to that AI. And you talked a little bit about how that's starting to be more relevant. So with AI able to generate visuals and prototypes so quickly, how do you see the role of the human designer evolving and within any innovation or practices?
Good question. I think I've seen a lot of discussion around like the human designer being the curator of things now that like AI is able to be the executor a lot more. There's still like things that it can't quite do, but that gap will close very quickly. So, but I think it's not it like in addition to the curation element, I think that is part of it. I think there's a big thing around what kind of taste you bring to things and like the personal taste almost that's influenced by your own your own human experiences and knowledges and biases. But I think there's something so interesting about how your personal taste might become more important as a designer in what you do. and how you create and curate with AI as a design tool. But I think overall, like, yes, it's another tool, but it's also a tool that's changing things a lot very quickly. And the main thing is to be using these tools. Yeah, I think.
Yeah, you
And
talked earlier. You talked earlier within one of the examples about you very much held the role of art direction, and then you'll be able to help to craft the relevant stories and things. So
yeah,
I thought that was super relevant.
yeah, and I think it's interesting because there's a lot of discussion around how like AI can help make things happen faster. I think that's definitely, yeah, like speed is one part of it, but I think it's also really important that we're still really protecting time for us, like designers and people in general working with AI to like think, because I think where it's helping condense the time down in certain areas, that means you can spend that same amount of time, that the rest of that time, um, thinking through something a little deeper where you might have had to move past it quite quickly given your 2 week time scale or whatever it is. So I think it's still really important to protect that time for us and use that time to focus on the problems we really want to solve.
That's true. I'm just gonna some other questions coming through. And there's another one actually just talking about, some of the thinking about the Institute of Innovation Management here is thinking about skills. And so what skills do you look for when hiring designers for innovation work specifically versus maybe more traditional design roles?
I think for what's worked for us is hiring really like hybrid designers. I think like myself, I'm jack of all trades kind of designer. And I also very much dabble in the innovation consulting side of things as well. Like that's part of my practice. So I think finding people who are A, really willing to do that, but also have a bit of a diverse skill set. Like you might, I think traditional design craft roles, you might get people who are really like craft experts in one thing, and that's also a really valuable type of design. But it's a different type of design which might not fit a innovation agency model as much. Maybe you'd pull them in as freelancers for specific projects, but if you need someone who's able to kind of, you know, I feel like I can be thrown at many different types of projects and learn or figure things out or use like different tools in my skill set to adapt to whatever problem we're finding. I think that's something really important for designers in innovation.
It's definitely that element is hard, and you're brilliant at this, is recognizing that innovation can be quite chaotic and quite ambiguous, and being able to make sense of it. That is quite a craft in itself, isn't it? And there's some questions coming through a little bit about sort of stakeholders, and this is one that we hear quite a bit, is how do you deal with design being cut from project budgets?
Oh, painfully. It hurts me every time. But I think because our designers are so versatile and also like practiced in the way innovation side of things, wherever possible, I still like try like sneak designers onto projects and get design into projects because I think sometimes people don't realize how useful it can be until you start to see it in practice. And so if we can still get a designer in and bring design in little ways, wherever we can, in whatever ways we can. There might be something where we go through a workshop and we come out with a bunch of ideas. And um, if you have a designer involved in that, we could be like, actually, let's visualize some of these and share that back to the client. They didn't necessarily ask for that, but we are doing because we think it's best and the right thing to do for this. And also, it can open people's eyes to the power of design too. So, yeah, basically try sneak it in anyways, as much as is like feasible.
I love it. I love it. I always love your first reaction with pain.
Oh, I think it's been really wonderful, what you've covered so far. We've got some amazing questions that are coming through on the Q&A here, as well as in the chat. And I think that given that we've only got to the last 2 minutes left, what we will do is we'll take those questions, and it would be great, Mickey and Toby, if you can perhaps write a response to those. So guys, don't worry, you will get a bit of a post-mortem, and we will get these answers to some of these questions for you, at least some thoughts. But what this really is the start of a conversation, the start of the conversation on what design really is. And in fact, there's steps from here. Think of this, this is your first taste on design, this is level one, but seeing how design can eventually be used as strategic design, as a methodology within organizations, and how they then operate and help them to align better with innovation, so that you have less of that fall down with leadership buy-in and those sorts of things. Is actually, where we can take this conversation. But as I said, this is the beginning. It's been absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much, Toby and Mickey, for joining us on our first one. If you can go to the last slide, our next webinar session will be next month, the 21st of April. And we'll really be starting to look at innovation management as a system and how that delivers on agility and resilience. And Hype will be joining us. We'll have Colin Nelson, and he's going to bring a couple of friends along to chat with us. So you'll start to see those invites go out. But thank you so much, everybody. And we will be having this recording on the website under resources. You can go and see other previous events and podcast episodes that we appear in there. But it's been so great, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. The sun is shining here in London, so I hope it's shining where you are. And we'll see you all again soon. And we will improve how we share our screens. We made some notes we did learn from today. But thank you so much.